Hey, David.
Hi there.
Welcome, everyone. Are folks able to see my screen? Thumbs up. All right. Excellent. All right. While we're waiting for others to join, please go ahead and add yourself to the attendance list there. Go ahead and start. I've still got folks trickling in, so we'll probably start in like 2 minutes.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, Jennifer. Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. I think we have most folks here. And I'm just going to apologize ahead. I may go on mute every once in a while because my throat is bothering me this morning. And so constantly having to clear, unfortunately. So today, the main agenda topic is the wrapping up this election process. So we had some good feedback on the GitHub issues. So I've tried to go ahead and summarize sort of the discussion that was happening there. There weren't too many changes based on the content from our last meeting. So I think that this may go quickly if we're all still pretty much in agreement unless something new pops up. So I'll just kind of run through these, and then if folks have comments, questions, just please bring them up as we go through each item. So the first one was the seats that are up for election during this process and who the candidates should be. We agreed that all 7 were up for election. In this table, you'll see I have current support. I kind of looked at what was happening on the GitHub issues and sort of divined whether that was a show of support or not. Not that we actually like officially voted or anything. So all 7 seats, folks are able to self-nominate by sending an email to the TAC mailing list. The candidate should go ahead and submit a candidate statement when they're self-nominating. So kind of what their platform is, this should not be a multi-paragraph bio, but just sort of a couple sentence candidate statement. Any questions on that one? I think it's pretty straightforward. That one seemed to have the most support.
To clarify, instead of all 7 being up for contributor election, it's the case that the 4 seats are up for change. I'm sorry, the 7 seats are up for change. 4 of those by election, 3 potentially by appointment by the governing board, right?
Yeah, so that's actually the last item that I have on here.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe so.
So fair to say all 7 are up for change, but 4 at least by default. And this may change because there's actually a conversation we'll have at the governing board on Thursday about whether the governing board wants to continue to appoint TAC members, and if so, when, before the election, after the election, that kind of thing. But one prospect is that it might be that all 7 are elected by the governing board.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's something to talk about. That's actually the last item on here because we had discussed that months ago about what the composition of it should be, the 4-3 split. And so I just wanted to confirm that everybody's still in agreement with that, or if we want to make a change. But that's good to know that the governing board will be discussing it as well. Any other questions, comments on that one, or shall we call this approved? All right, we'll call this approved for now. All right, next one, the electorate. So those wishing to vote will request a ballot by submitting this Google form that somebody will be creating hopefully soon. And then the election officials, which we'll also discuss in a second, will determine that eligibility based on participation, their contributions. So if someone has been participating in OpenSSF, that could be via code or any other mechanisms. It doesn't necessarily have to be code contributions. The election officials will validate that, and then they will receive a ballot. So fairly straightforward.
I think what we'll be able to do is get a list of contributors from the last year out of LFX Insights, and proactively email them and say, we've determined you're eligible, and just either confirm here or watch for a ballot. And then we could say anybody who hasn't received that ballot but believes they should be eligible because they've contributed in some other way that we haven't automatically detected can submit to this form. That
would be great.
Yeah.
So those not identified consult requests.
And happy to open up to the election officials what our process is for determining who's been a contributor.
That's awesome. Any other comments on this one? Can we call this approved as well? All right. So here we come to the process and the tools that we're going to use that we discussed last time. So we discussed using OpenVote. Oh, sorry, Arnaud, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, sorry, I was a bit late, but just on that very point you just talked about, I mean, Brian, you may remember in Hyperledger, we have this system with Insight. One key aspect, though, is you need to determine a time range that is taken into account for Insights.
Yeah, that's
so you're going to have to set a period. So I just
worth being explicit about, I guess,
because
presuming the last year. Yeah, but worth being explicit about, so we're all clear. Is the last year contributions?
Yeah, exactly. When do you end, and stuff like this. I mean, we have the case in Hyperledger where people, contributed like 2 days before the election and say, hey, I'm not on the list. And we're like, sorry, we cut, 2 weeks ago. That was the deadline. And so it doesn't really matter what it is, but you need to be clear about what it is so that you can, explain to people. I mean, you could say it's the final date is, but there, there's practical aspect to it. The team is going to have to build that list. So at some point they need to freeze and say, okay, this is it. We're pulling the data now. The list is what it is.
To tell you what, since there isn't a schedule that's part of this decision matrix today, and I'd let us come back to you with a specific set of dates for when certain things happen. And what we'll do in that schedule is propose, as of this date, any contributions within the prior year will count towards eligibility.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, okay. I think that's reasonable. But yeah, definitely having a cutoff date I think is important to have for future. All right, so back to the process. We discussed using OpenVote with the ranked choice voting mechanism. The election officials will announce a timeline for nominations and elections via the TAC mailing list and Slack channels. There was some discussion on GitHub issues around this about all of the various channels that we should announce this on. There's the announcement mailing list, there's the TAC mailing list, probably all of the working group mailing list as well, just to make sure that it's seen by everyone. So we'll go ahead and spam that out to everybody. And then at the conclusion of the nomination period, the election officials will go ahead and publish that list of the candidates, most likely on the TAC repo that will then again get sent out to everyone for folks to go ahead and look at. And then, as mentioned already, the officials will validate the eligibility of voters before the election. Everybody good with that? Approve? Questions, comments? Another approved. Okay, this one is a little bit more shaky as far as definition goes. So who are the officials? So based on discussion, it seemed like, and Ava provided a link to some existing documentation and other forums that stated 3 election officials was a suggestion here, chosen by the TAC. The eligibility is that an election official has to also be eligible to vote in the election. So basically have participated in OpenSSF in the past year. And then the general clause that we kind of have across OpenSSF is max representation. You can't have more than one person from the same organization. That includes subsidiaries and affiliates. So for example, Microsoft and GitHub, that type thing. So given that this one's a little bit more loose, there wasn't a ton of obvious approval for it. I just want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page here. What do folks think about this proposal? Any other comments or suggestions? So the one thing that's awfully vague here is chosen by the TAC. So in this case, I think we could either just have folks volunteer, just kind of go about it that route, or we could appoint 3 people and vote.
Is there any reason now that we have all the staff that we have supporting us, we wouldn't just ask, the LF, employees to take care of this so that we don't have to have any volunteers do so?
Yeah, I'm certainly open to that. Ava had mentioned that this is how another group did it. So we're kind of modeling after that. Just given that there's other communities following this sort of mechanism, I think that did make sense, but I don't have any opposition to that, but definitely it seems like the easier route, honestly, in my opinion, but definitely want to hear from other folks.
Part of the context there is Kubernetes versus CNCF. There are different levels of the organization, Kubernetes being a specific project. And so the link that I had shared as a reference for how Kubernetes does it, it's not a direct one-to-one mapping. It's like saying, well, this is how the CNCF does their election to how the OpenSSF could do theirs, which is not the reference I shared. As far as why, yeah, I could go either way as well. I can see a benefit to having it be a community-run election. But it's nice to have, if there is staff, have staff do it. It does seem kind of the easy answer.
So Brian, Jory, David.
Sorry, certainly by default, we'll do everything necessary to ensure a smooth election. I think the point of an election official is to look over our shoulder and make sure, what we're doing never can be criticized as not having, had the involvement of somebody trusted by the community. So, yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that isn't here that you would normally have is that an election official must be somebody not running in the election. Yeah, this is really just to have somebody looking over our shoulder, especially for dealing with things that are harder to bring up in a public forum like this, such as, was this person really eligible or not? Hopefully we have very few of those kinds of questions.
I have to admit, I'm assuming the LF was going to be doing a lot of this stuff for you, so that the people who want to vote can vote, the people who are candidates can be candidates, and
Yes, yeah.
So if,
I mean, the Apache Software Foundation has this at Hyperledger. Arno, remind me, but I'm pretty sure we've had a couple people play this role.
So that's the thing I wanted to share. I mean, in Hyperledger, we started with nothing, and basically the staff was running it, and then the chair then volunteered to help them, and it created some controversy because it was also running, and some people say, well, where's the transparency? When in fact, I think it was all very, well intended, but anyway. So in the end, I mean, the last election, we actually have a mailing list, which is public, where people can make their case. So the staff runs the election, to be clear, and they have a process with all the dates and everything that is presented to the TAC, I guess in this case, beforehand for approval. So everybody knows what the process is going to be. And then they are in charge of executing the plan. Then the only really problem that can surface is what Brian was just touching on, is eligibility. Somebody who says, hey, I'm not on the list, but I think I should be for this and that reason. And then the staff has to do some, due diligence to figuring out whether this is a valid claim or not. And that can be a bit touchy. I mean, in Hyperledger, in the end, we have a mailing list where this is being discussed openly. Anybody can join the mailing list.
I will say that each Apache project has each project management committee has its own process. And there is not a rotating board. Basically, you're my project management committee member for life, unless you're voted out under extreme circumstance. Because knowledge of the code or knowledge of the process and procedures never goes away, so they don't like removing people.
Right, a better comparable would be the board elections by members at the ASF rather than PMC.
so I just added a bullet about their primary roles. Is this more accurate?
That's fair.
Yeah, yep, that looks good.
Yeah, oversight and being able to help answer nuanced questions that are better handled privately. Yep. And I think the oversight as community members, regardless of who's actually running the election, that oversight as a community function is important in any election.
Always good to tell people what their primary role is when defining a job. Okay.
So it sounds like we're all in agreement to have LF staff be the election officials. Any disagreement there?
No, that's not quite what I think we're writing out here.
Oh, with oversight from community, or is that
Right?
The election officials are the community provided oversight function, where the LF staff might perform a lot of the mechanics of running the election.
Oh, okay, yeah. Good distinction.
Yep. What Ava said.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that the job of the TAC election officials is to bask in the glory and not actually have any work other than occasionally asking questions, because we're going to try to do a good job and there won't be much to question. But
I think we may have a bit of a challenge here by saying that if it's TAC election officials are members of the TAC and also cannot be candidates, and we're resetting the entire TAC each time. I think we might.
I think we said chosen by the TAC, not members of the TAC.
right.
But I do see your point that we are putting a requirement in here that the election officials not be running for a seat. I don't think that would pose an issue. I would hope that we can find 3 people who are, well-respected members of the community who are not running, but would want to be involved in this process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm not expecting the election officials positions to normally be a big task. Obviously, it's politically important, but not time sensitive, but not a lot of time unless there's a real problem.
I would assume that there's 3 election officials for every major election that happens.
Right. But hopefully their jobs will typically be, we're not talking a 40-hour-a-week job.
Oh, correct. Yeah, it's once every year or 2 years, and fairly lightweight, as it's mostly oversight and answering questions like, did this person really contribute? Yes, they did.
Right.
Yeah, it seems like the bulk of the work is just validating the candidates, right? Which I think in most cases should be fairly straightforward, but. Okay, so chosen by the TAC, not necessarily members of the TAC, can't be candidates. LF staff is going to help run the mechanics of the actual election. And then no conflicting employment status. So I think that's pretty much everything. Any other questions, comments, or are we good on this one as well?
Can they be members of the governing board? I guess technically they can.
Yeah, I mean, if that's who the TAC chooses, I would think in this election that might be a little bit more difficult, given that we have an all-new governing board that might not be as familiar with some of the work that's been done.
I understand. Just a clarification.
But it certainly seems feasible. Yeah. My first thought was to leverage maybe some of the working group leads, if they're willing, of course.
Even though we trust our governing board, would it not be potentially seen as a conflict of interest by some in the community if the governing board were appointing some of the TAC seats and the governing board were overseeing the election of the other TAC seats? I don't know, folks that have worked on other elections, would this be something we need to consider?
Will you repeat the question, Jennifer, so I make sure I understand it?
Sure. I was just wondering, like someone had raised the question, could the governing board oversee the election? And I was asking the group, especially folks who have participated in other elections of this type, would it be seen as a conflict of interest, given that the governing board will be appointing some of the TAC seats themselves for them to also oversee the election? And I'm not saying they necessarily would be. I'm just curious if it's an issue or not.
Let me take the con position and somebody else could take the pro, but I think not, simply because there's multiple officers and they come from different organizations. So even if one is, say, hopefully no one is evil, but if one is evil, then the others can compensate.
You can tell this is a security conscious, zero trust community. We're trying all different angles on this. I think in practice, because the person cannot run for the TAC themselves, if they're an election official, and the TAC approves the person who's volunteered to be in this role, because it is a volunteer thing. There's not any reward for this, really. It's not. I haven't ever seen it be a problem in practice, and I wouldn't tend to see it not be likely to be one. But I hate to be the kind of person who just dismisses concerns.
I'll game this question a little bit and say, what if all three election officials chosen by the TAC are members of the current governing board? Then it could look a little bit odd, but I think Brian's point is still correct. The flip side is, should we prevent any members of the governing board from requesting to be or being asked to be part of the election officials? And I don't see a reason to prevent that.
Okay, then I don't have any concern about this. Thanks, everyone.
That was a good discussion. Sounds like just kind of keeping the back of our mind, and I think also having the clause around you must be from separate organizations will kind of help with some of that as well.
I'll add, though, that I haven't seen this in practice in other bodies that run community-based elections. I haven't seen a governing board, anyone on a governing board, also be an election official.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, I will not try to summarize this yet again, but I will say that I think we are all in consensus unless I hear a dissenting vote. Okay, the next one is the TAC size. there was some discussion last time around increasing the tax size for various reasons, including diversity and growing opinions and things like that. It seemed like the consensus on GitHub was to keep it at 7 for now, but certainly folks were open to the idea of increasing it. Everybody still good with 7? Going once, going twice. All right, 7 it is. And then this last one here is the discussion we had some months ago, but just to revisit it. So we had this idea of splitting the 7 between the community and the governing board, where 4 seats would come from the community or the technical initiative side, basically the community around the TAC, and then 3 seats would actually come from the governing board. But then, as Brian mentioned earlier, the governing board is having a discussion later this week regarding whether they even want to participate in that. So Brian, I'm actually curious, is there, have there been discussions already kind of indicating that they don't want to do that, or they don't have interest in it?
Well, it's something I raised with a couple of them privately. I haven't talked about it in a previous board meeting, and I want to be respectful that the prior governing board did play a role in kind of arriving at a balancing act here. But what I was looking to do is just try to align it with things that I've seen other LF projects do. Some LF projects do continue to have governing boards appoint members of the TAC, and that's part of the value of being on the governing board. I've seen it. I've just tended to see keeping governing boards focused on the funding side and the business operations, and letting the TAC really be accountable to the community and accountable to the technology projects. To be a good division of kind of labor. The one place where governing boards sometimes do have an appropriate role is ensuring that the TAC does reflect the diversity, and I mean that in all senses, of the community and of the technology projects. And so, in some cases, I've seen them step in after an election and say, well, here's 3 more people or 5 more people who help flesh out and cover the broad spectrum of interests in our community. So I'm not making a firm proposal or recommendation to the governing board. I'm saying one option is simply for the sake of streamlining things, and because I worry about trying to get 22 people to agree on 3 people to appoint. That's also in the back of my head, is I'm just trying to reduce the amount of machinery and amount of bureaucracy to an absolute minimum. So that was one reason I was interested in kind of detangling these. But the only reason that I could see them keeping it, or that I think would be a valid reason to keep it, would be to come in after the public election, the contributor election, and go, here's 3 more that we think help flesh everyone out, flesh out the TAC. So I'm not, it's not a foregone conclusion one or the other, and I'm not even sure which way the governing board's likely to vote, but I just wanted them to be conscious about that decision.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So it sounds like for now, unless folks here want to change their minds on this one, which is okay, we'll keep it as is, 4 and 3 from the governing board, and then pending the outcome of that discussion, we may need to amend this. Yeah, so you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I've seen what Brian's referring to, and I think it has worked well in some groups. And I might just plant the seed. If the governing board doesn't want to have, wants to reserve the right to go down that path, what about a 7 community elected and then an optional 2 from the governing board if they feel that those 7 didn't cover some important areas? I've seen some organizations also go that path. So I'm comfortable with 4 and 3 as here. I just wanted to plant that seed.
No, that's an interesting idea. What do folks think about that?
Before I weigh in on that, I would just also make the observation that I think the size and scope of the technical challenge is significant enough that a TAC of larger than 7 could make sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, we did discuss that at the previous meeting too, that was one of the ideas, that as OpenSSF grows, we may need to grow the TAC to cover everything. And so I know there's some new working groups that have come up lately. I think folks are still good with 7, but yeah, I could definitely see the potential in this expanding for sure.
I think another option too, Brian, with respect to the, how do you, with a larger governing board, how do you try and manage the function of, how that gets appointed? It could be done by just, drawing straws at that level possibly. Because I do think there's some benefit to having a TAC that's populated with some different methodologies that provide a comprehensive point of view.
Yeah, and I think Ava's suggestion was interesting as far as if the governing board did decide that, oh, generally speaking, we're not interested in appointing, having 7 community seats, that then the governing board could say, well, we actually think you need 2 more perspectives, in this way. I could definitely see that happening and being useful. But again, this is all kind of at the behest of whether the governing board wants to do this or not. So we kind of need to wait and see what their comments are.
We're also in a spot where, most of the governing board participants, have employees from their staff who are following what's going on in the technology community. You don't have, a wide, division between the two. So, that's part of why I bring it up is it just might not be necessary for the governing board to have to appoint. But I think Ava was referring to, the kind of the point I made earlier about sometimes it can help to have a second look on here's some voices that might be missing from the conversation. But of course, these are public meetings, so and everyone's free to talk. And the votes when they happen tend to be fairly unanimous or consensus driven. So I'm just trying to avoid too much bureaucracy or too much process, because that can kind of bog down conversations when they happen.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And then kind of the other sort of elephant in the room that's been in the back of my mind is that not only is the governing board new, a lot of the governing board members are now also very high level executives and may not be as involved in the day-to-day technical aspects, and so therefore may not, I guess for lack of a better term, I apologize, be qualified to appoint somebody, or just have the knowledge. Qualified is totally the wrong word. But
well, they're all nerds. Don't worry, they're all even though they're high level, they're all technical. So
they're all technical, yeah, but they may not be following all the projects, as much
Right.
as the people, and that's kind of a concern. But
Yeah, I think they're qualified, but they have limited time.
yeah, that's a better, yes. I'm struggling with words this morning. I apologize.
Yeah, I think the words you meant.
Yeah, thank you for translating.
But also further removed from the on the ground activity that's been going on in the OpenSSF for the past year.
This is what I'm trying to say. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for this team to get my words out.
Your hole has been dug out there, right?
Thank you. I did apologize before I said qualified. I knew it was wrong.
So I just wanted to add that, regarding the size issue, I think you might want to, give yourself the possibility of reopening the size issue based on what the governing board decides to do, just as a possibility, because if you're really down to only 3 seats elected by the community, the technical community at large, might be a bit small. So you might want to, I think, for now you can wait, see what they decide. But
yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just make a note of it here that if the governing board decides not to appoint TAC seats, all 7 become seats.
I think that the 7 seats and the breakdown is actually part of the charter. So I'm not even sure the TAC can change that. I think the governing board would have to increase the size or change the breakdown.
I'm not sure it's part of the charter, because I think we made this as the TAC made it as a proposal to the governing board back in January, I think.
So I see it here in the PDF.
Oh, is it? Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
They must have updated it.
One other question that I had. So for the 3 seats from the governing board, should they choose to appoint it, are they limited to choosing from the nominees that we've come up with down here? Or can they invent people whole cloth that we haven't seen?
Yeah, that's a very, very valid question.
Very good question.
I think they should still be qualifiable, by whatever rules, that they're eligible to vote, for example. They should be members of that community. But otherwise, I think they should be able to be people who didn't run in the election.
So the wording in the charter that I just pasted here is actually,
Yeah, we got it flipped.
yeah, it has 3-4 the other way.
Oh, that's interesting.
Unless this charter is out of date or something, this is what's checked into
That might be the
repo.
old charter, because let me see if that maps to, because if you go on the website and do the sign up now, you'll get a link to the charter there. Let me see if I can find what my copy says.
Yeah, because I remember when we were discussing this, that one of the key things was having 4 community seats, because this was a community technical thing. So more appointees would come from the tax side rather than the governing board side.
Yeah, what I have in my charter is this that I'll post here. This is from sections 6A of the charter. Sorry, participation agreement and charter revision number. Oh, this says 2020 November. Let me look at.
Yeah, what you have is the original one. I remember that change.
Yeah, because I remember this as well. And I think this is what led to us then creating the proposal that maybe then got updated, that became the 4-3 split.
Ah, got it. Okay.
The one that Dan linked to has a date on it that says as amended September 2nd, 2021. So I think that's fresh.
The current one. Okay.
That's correct. Yeah. But I am surprised by the split being the opposite way.
I remember it 3 governing board, 4 community.
Yeah, that's how I remembered it as well. So. And that would be my preference, to be clear.
Yeah, I'm mystified. I mean, is that possible? It's a typo. That's pretty.
And here I'm wondering if that's the charter we were putting in front of people when we asked them to join or not. Anyways, is there a record of the TAC or governing board approving the 4-3 governing board to public split?
I know we sent it to the governing board at some point. I have to find the mail on that, and then look through governing board meeting minutes to see what was approved.
There should be a record and a vote.
Yeah, it should be somewhere. We don't have to dig it up right this second, but so let's assume that what is here is the current. Do we want to attempt to change it, to flip it back the other way? Make a proposal to the governing board? I personally would prefer that we had 4 community seats and 3 governing board seats. This may become a non-issue if the governing board does decide not to appoint at all.
I wouldn't raise it unless they've decided that they want to keep board seats, TAC board seats at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we can wait and see the outcome of that discussion, and then if they do, we could recommend the change.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, that seems right to me.
Yeah, I'm not even sure.
Yeah, if necessary. Yeah.
Ryan, can you after this meeting go hunt up and see if you can
Yes.
find, because my memory is the same as yours. It was a 4-3 split with 4 being community, 3 being governing board.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, that's what I
I'm
remember as well.
mystified by this. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, I'll try to track that down. So I'm going to go ahead and put in here that our recommendation is 4-3. And then
And some of us recollect it that way. So we're going to need to find
to
out.
investigate. GB approved. Control.
But it wouldn't be the first time my memory is wrong, but that's what I remember.
Well, we do seem to have a communal memory on it, so if we're all wrong, then we'll see. But okay, so in general, I think we're in agreement here. We just need to go lock down the details and make sure that we're in the right place here. And then Brian, that the governing board meeting's on Thursday, is that correct?
That's correct.
So after Thursday, we'll have some more information. So before we get to the last two items, which is when are we doing this? Are there other process or issues that people want to bring up?
Actually, can I bring up on this point within this document, which is our meeting notes for the year, if you go down to 2.9, it says what I remembered.
Oh,
Community 3 board.
So that is, yeah, memory serves correctly then. So we'll just have to see what got sent to the governing board and what they actually approved. All right, any other process or tooling discussions that we want to have before we start talking about dates? It sounds like we're pretty much in agreement for everything at this point. So as we all know, we're well past when we thought we were going to be holding elections initially. So in an effort to move this thing along, I think we need to lock down a date as far as when we will have nominations go out, how long we'll collect those for, and then when the actual election will occur. Some of this does involve getting some tooling in place, so we need to account for time for that. But I would say we should probably err on the sooner rather than later side of this. So what do folks think about starting nominations this week or next week?
The real question is the deadline, not the start.
Yes.
Starts now. We can say start now, but
yeah, and I was going to say, yeah, give like from the time of collection nominations, like a week to give folks time to put that together.
Nomination for election candidates or election official candidates?
Election candidates.
You've got to pick your election chairs first.
Yes.
Yeah. And just to be realistic, we have 2.5 weeks before everyone becomes a turkey.
Exactly. Yep.
And I think the bigger meta question is, can we squeeze a full election in by, and close it by the end of the week of the 12th, right? Close it on the 17th or 18th. And then the TAC starts after the, in the new year.
There are three different decision points, though. One is who are the election officials. The next is the first one is who are eligible for voting. That pool, from that pool then are drawn who are your election officials and who are the candidates who run for seats. But you first have to have that list of who's eligible to vote. There's a little bit of interplay between these because your election officials come from that pool, but right now may also be called upon to vet the validity of that pool itself.
I don't know that we need the full list to select the officials. If the TAC is selecting them, we can just use the criteria for to determine whether or not someone's valid as election official.
Yep.
You could probably even decide that right during this meeting.
No, they have to accept the role.
Yes.
But perhaps
you probably also want the governing board to make decision as to whether they're getting involved or not before you start this election process.
Yeah, so that it can be clearly communicated to the community how many seats are up for election.
Yes.
And who the election officials are when the ballots are sent out, as it were. Or sorry, when the call for nominations for candidacy are sent out.
Right, and the next TAC call here would be in 2 weeks, unless we did a special meeting to appoint an election official. Unless somebody here is clearly a contributor who will qualify and also is not interested in running for the TAC, and you all just want to, name one or two here and approve them. Here's the bigger point is, yeah, 2.5 weeks, we can do things expeditiously. It might, I don't say violate, but it might require, a fair degree of trust between all of us as a community to overlap some things that otherwise might be strictly sequential. But working backwards, Ava, I appreciate you were working forwards. Working backwards, if we said we want to have an election the week of December 12th, which would be 1 week to conduct the election, which is probably fair and standard. Some communities do too, but let's say one. And then the week before, the week of the 6th, to have people self-nominate, which is also compressed but fair. And that means, through the end of this week, getting closure on the governing board question, which I think we can, and any other prep work. So it's tight. I think we can do it. And, I'd be glancing over at Jory if we were in a room just to make sure she was comfortable with running an election that quickly. Because that's, there might be dependencies I'm not aware of, but I just want us to all realize we'd have to work asynchronously, be a bit perhaps quicker and parallelized than we might otherwise be if we wanted to do it by the end of this year. If not, we should just punt it to January.
Yeah, so I know you're behind what you were hoping for, but I don't know that there is much harm in waiting for January and doing this much more peacefully.
Yeah, I do tend to agree. As much as I hate to push this out even further, it seems like rushing the first one might just be fraught with potential issues that might just push it out to when folks aren't here anyway. So what are folks' thoughts on pushing the start of this process to say January 4th? I know a lot of people will be out that Monday, which will be January 3rd.
I don't understand the request there, Ryan.
Starting the election process on January 4th, but rather than trying to squeeze it in the next 2 weeks.
I'm not a voting member, but it makes sense to me. You're talking about like 1 or 2 weeks of an election, so right? So
correct. Yep.
My suggestion would be, and I like Brian's framing of it, working backwards. Get as much of the groundwork in place as possible before the end of the calendar year, so the election can actually be held. Right? You have like the candidate pools are in place, all the things in place to actually hold an election. We're not starting from where we are right now.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, we should not put pause on this.
Okay.
Yeah, we should collect the candidate pools. People could be self-nominating, all that, and then actually run the election on the 4th of January.
Yeah, so it's just starting the election on the 4th. So it would run the 4th through
4th
what,
to the
2
11th.
weeks?
1 week, 2
1
weeks.
week. Do you want 1 or 2 weeks?
I'm fine with 1, but I don't. Do folks normally want 2 or need to?
As long as it's.
I've seen large communities do 2 weeks. I've also seen them do 1 week. But I will say that in communities where I've seen elections get rushed or overlap a holiday, there have often been blowback afterwards that things weren't communicated well. And this was raised on some of the GitHub issues that were concerned about getting the right information out to all the constituents so that ballots aren't missed, things don't get lost in the spam folder over the holidays, and giving people adequate time and awareness that they have a right or obligation to participate in this. That will help prevent any potential blowback or accusations later.
You know what? And adding an extra week doesn't sound like a terrible problem compared to that.
I would say let it run a little bit longer. Like, make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's. It's a whole lot better for this to take an extra week or 2 or 3 than have to rerun an election because there's considerable doubt. Having seen organizations have to rerun elections in the past, so.
Yeah, that seems like a reasonable trade-off.
Okay, so if we work back from January 4, we need nominations, we need election officials by when? 2 weeks for election officials, and
So do we want to wait for the next TAC meeting, or do we want to try to do this asynchronously via email? I personally would prefer to do it sooner.
Brian, do you know when the governing board might come up with a decision so that we would know?
Yeah, I'd hope to close
How about Thursday?
Thursday.
Okay, that's cool. Thanks.
I'm inserting some some
Thank you.
things we need to answer. So when do we need election officials by?
So I guess the earliest is going to be Thursday, right? We need to have that answer first. So I think, and then we'll probably need some time to discuss. So
Yeah,
are folks good with doing this asynchronously, or is there a desire to do it at the next meeting? Or we could discuss asynchronously and then decide at the next meeting. That's an option as well.
I'm fine with either one. For the asynchronous discussion, do you want to have that in the GitHub issues or the mailing list or?
Yeah, I think GitHub issues has worked pretty well in the past.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, so my default, like I mentioned earlier, is to talk to some of the working group leads and see if any of them are interested in being election officials and also not running for the TAC. And I can reach out to them. And then if folks have other recommendations as well, we can kind of go from there.
Well, if they're not going to be voted on until 2 weeks from today, you don't really need them to self-nominate by the end of this week. Self-nominate by the 10th.
Yep, that's true. Yep.
And the next TAC meeting is, let's see, I can't add 14 to November 30. So
I believe that's the 13th.
thank you.
Okay, so we can all reach out to folks for the election officials, and then people can self-nominate. So I think, Jory, would you be the one creating the Google form that folks, both candidates and election officials, could self-nominate on?
Yeah, I would definitely be glad to do that and have that be, an LF form. Do you all want to see a copy of the form before it is production?
Yeah, if you just want to send it to the TAC mailing list, I think,
Okay.
just to make sure, and then we can send it out to the candidate one will go out to everybody as we discussed, and then the other election officials, we can just reach out individually to folks.
So I'd like to suggest slightly different dates here, and I'll explain why.
There's another.
The election official self-nomination by 12/10 and then selection on 12/14 makes sense. That runs right up into the holiday window for a lot of people. I think candidate nomination or candidate self-nomination and validation by election officials needs a minimum of 1 business week that is not overlapping common holidays, which puts that at the week of the 4th to the 7th at the earliest, possibly even the 14th. The end of that period, the election officials validate the final list of candidates and their position statements, all of that. That could get emailed out then aggressively on the 10th, optimistically on the 17th, that being a Monday or the Sunday beforehand. And then if 1 week of elections, that means the election closes on probably the 21st or 28th, if it goes on a Friday. It doesn't have to go on a Friday, but like that's kind of the window is it all runs through January to the end of January. But there's no reasonable way I think the election could start on January 4th. And you'd run into a lot of people saying, that they missed out on the opportunity to participate because it was run over the holiday break.
Yeah, that is a concern for sure. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through a calendar here. So 14th, 10th.
Basically what I'm saying is there's 3 weeks from the 14th to the 4th, roughly, when we should assume no business is going to happen.
Exactly. So then should we have excuse me, candidates self-nominate by January 7? Is the end of the week, the first week of January?
Self-nominations by the 7th, validation by the election officials the following week, sending out the final list of candidates that next week, and then either 1 or 2 weeks for voting. I don't have a stake in that game. I think that's reasonable.
And validation goes for a week, so that gets us to the 14th. Then the actual election begins on the 17th.
Anybody have concerns with that timeline?
That seems good to me. It might be good to pin down the date that we want to announce the election and the self-nomination. So it's due by January 7th, but we should select a date by which we would like to send it.
Yeah, agreed. So I think, so once we get the election officials selected, then we could do because they're the ones that are going to do all the validation of candidates and things. Then we can have them send out the announcement for self-selection. So that would probably be on, if we're saying December 10th, December 14th. So what is that? Sorry, 14th is, I guess we could send that out on the 14th as well, right? Because we should have all the tooling in place by that point.
Sounds good to me.
Great.
Yeah.
Tooling available by then?
Yeah, no, it's pretty easy stuff.
Excellent. All right. Okay, I think we've got everything locked down. So we've got election officials happening by the 10th. They'll be selected at the next TAC meeting on the 14th, at which point they will then send the announcement for candidates to self-nominate. They have all the way through January 7th, at which point the election officials will announce who they are, and then we will hold the election on January 17th through the 31st.
So we're validating the candidates by the 14th, January 14th?
Correct, yeah. Yeah, we said to give them a week, so.
Yeah, and that means that we're announcing the candidates when we start the voting, basically? Or actually, the January 14th, I guess.
I think, yeah, the 14th will be when we do it. All right, we got 1 minute left. I think we've pretty much covered everything. Any other questions, comments, concerns about timeline or anything else before we wrap up? All right, well, thank you all very, very much. We'll get this process started and really appreciate everybody's comments and feedback.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.